Welcome to the Strategic Marketer Podcast, where we talk about strategies, tactics, and practical steps to help you become a more strategic marketer. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today's conversation is with Declan Mulkeen. Declan is the CMO at an ABM agency called Strategic ABM. He's also the host of the Let's Talk ABM podcast. And if you haven't guessed yet, today's conversation is all about ABM, or account-based marketing. What it is, when you should pursue an ABM strategy as a company, and some practical steps for getting started on your ABM journey. So without further ado, let's dive into the conversation. All right, thanks for joining the podcast, Declan. What is ABM?
Hi, Joseph. Thanks for having me today. I'm delighted to talk about ABM. Good question. What is ABM? Well, ABM, the acronym stands for account-based marketing. And I think that for some people can cause somewhat of a problem, actually, particularly nowadays with how organizations are aligned and how sales and marketing are coming together under kind of a growth umbrella. But account-based marketing, in its simplest definition, is it's a targeting lens. It's a way of looking at a select number of accounts and how you choose to target them in order to win, grow, or retain this select group of accounts. So this shortest definition is it's a targeting lens.
Yeah, so actually, I want you to talk a little bit more about the challenge of the name being ABM, because I think for me as a marketing person, sometimes the lines getting blurred between marketing and sales in organizations that are very sales heavy can end up meaning that all the marketing people just get pulled into short-term goals of, fulfilling sales-like activities. And that was one thing that comes up in my mind a lot when we were talking about ABM specifically. Yeah,
well, I think obviously the term ABM was coined back in 2003 by a person called Bev Burgess, who has been working within the B2B marketing world for many, many years. And it came about, I think she was having lunch or dinner with some marketeers from Accenture and Unisys, and they were talking to her about something that they'd come up with called client-centric marketing, which is kind of a continuation from key account marketing and key account sales, which has been around, as you know, for a number of years. And I think she then took that kind of idea and developed out a methodology around account-based marketing. And Bev, who I interviewed for my own podcast, Let's Talk ABM, some time ago, actually, even she would say that perhaps the use of the M in the acronym for account-based marketing is probably not the best use, because we tend to talk about account-based strategy, and I think if you can talk about it in that sense, it actually is much more of a unifying term as opposed to an exclusive term to marketing. And I think modern account-based marketing is much more of an organization-wide approach. It actually involves sales, it involves customer success, it involves your account management team, it involves the C-suite, everyone from the CEO down, and I think if you can see it much more of an alignment strategy, whereby an organization is saying, hey, we've got a group of accounts, either they're existing accounts that we have that we're looking to grow or we're looking to retain, or we have a set of accounts that we are aligned to what we want to be as a business. And these are the type of accounts that we want to win. And therefore, what can we do to win those accounts? If you can see it much more in that kind of language of unification, of alignment, then you're on the road to success.
So, and I know we'll dive into the details of it a little bit more, but the idea would be figuring out a way to align all of your teams, marketing, sales, customer service, and it probably starts in marketing in that case, as far as any materials you're going to create or whatever to go after that account. Good chance that's going to come out of your marketing department. More of an alignment between those departments where each group is focusing on reaching the same accounts, and we're on the same page about which accounts we're reaching, not necessarily telling your marketing people, pick up the phone and dial people at this individual company, and an excuse for the sales leaders to pull marketers onto their sales team and outbound outreach.
Yeah, it's definitely not the case that marketing will overnight become sales, but it is, having said that, it's a very, very commercial approach. It's it's probably the most commercial approach actually that exists within the marketing domain. And I think the reason that maybe some marketers struggle with ABM is the kind of much more of a commercial focus, and that is, if you work in a normal marketing sphere and your job, you're creating great content, you're putting it out there, you're creating demand, you're doing inbound, you're doing lead gen, you're doing demand generation or whatever. That's all well and good, but you don't necessarily get under the skin of your sales colleagues. You don't necessarily get under the skin of your clients and your future customers that you'd like to win. You're not really getting that kind of heavy commercial focus. And I think probably one of the things, I mean, there are many, but one of the things that separates account-based marketing or an account-based strategy from other types of marketing strategies is the kind of very significant commercial focus. And I think a lot of the kind of the ABM programs that we create and we run for our clients, we work exclusively with B2B technology brands. So the kind of the work that we're doing is we build, what we call account experiences or ABM experiences that start at the very beginning of the journey from, building awareness, educating, influencing, and then, but it's driving everything through to a commit stage. And the commit stage would typically be, target accounts attending some kind of workshop, attending some kind of strategy meeting, attending something whereby they're able to actually learn a lot more about how the clients that we work with are able to help them and help their challenges, their pains, help them to become better, to become quicker, to become more efficient, to become more successful, etc. So
absolutely,
one thing that we find when we roll out ABM programs to our clients, and we always bring the sales teams into this rollout. We always bring the sales teams into the kickstart. We always bring the sales teams of our clients into the whole strategy. And it's a real eye-opener actually for the sales teams, because they actually say, well, for once, it looks like marketing actually understands what we're trying to achieve. It looks like marketing
I see what you're saying.
Is actually looking to help us win accounts, help us grow accounts. And that's why I like to call ABM the greatest unifier that exists between sales and marketing, because it breaks down all the barriers. It breaks down all the kind of the different language that both teams use. Yeah. No one's talking about MQLs. No one's talking about SQLs, all these kind of acronyms that really haven't done marketing any favors over the years. They've all gone. And all we're talking about is the language of accounts. And the language of accounts is the language of sales.
Yeah, and the language of sales is good sales, and really the language of good marketing is the language of your customers. And if you're focusing on key accounts, you can actually get that narrowed down extremely far, where you could be doing research on that particular company's goals, and what if they're larger companies, their quarterly earnings reports that they're putting out, and the statements by their CEO of what their goals are, and you could be using that even language that the company uses internally to be describing how you can benefit them. And if your marketing and sales are aligned on that, then that's really powerful. And I know that's kind of a little bit more of an adversarial question, but I think that is challenging, because this is a part the podcast for marketers, and I think it is hard when ABM is done in a certain way. It can end up just being exclusionary towards the longer term pieces of building brand and things like that. But on the flip side, marketers have not done themselves favors by disconnecting themselves so far from revenue and sales, and the whole point of why all of us are here, which is to help serve more customers better. And then, we could use lots of excuses like brand, and that could be an excuse for, well, I don't really want to be accountable for the work that I'm doing and making sure that it's moving the needle. And it sounds like ABM can really be helpful in bridging that gap. So who is ABM a good fit for, and who would you say ABM is a poor fit for?
Yeah, well, I'll come back to that point around brand actually, if we after this question, because I think there's a couple of interesting points to talk about there. But I think in terms of who ABM is a good fit for and who it's not a good fit for, generally speaking, and there's a lot of debate out there about this, but our position is that ABM is more suitable if you've got a marketing team, which might sound a little bit strange to say that, but not every organization has actually got a marketing team. Some teams may be more sales centric, maybe more sales focused, might have somebody who does a little bit of marketing, but really they haven't really got a team. So you've got to have a marketing team because it's resource heavy. You've got to be targeting mid-market to enterprise clients. It's not really suitable if you're targeting small businesses and SMBs and SMEs, etc. The average order value, we would recommend that to be somewhere north of $30,000, euros, pounds, even more, perhaps even $50,000, etc. Because the price needs to be sufficiently high to value and to warrant the investment that you're making.
Absolutely.
I think it also needs to be, ABM is much more suitable when you have a long sales cycle, when you have a complex sales cycle. A lot of you think about the Oracles and the IBMs, these guys are selling sophisticated solutions that require, a lot of analysis, a lot of thinking, a lot of due diligence, a lot of investigation on the behalf of the clients who's looking to purchase. So that's when ABM can really come into its own. And also, when you are trying to talk to and to target many individuals within the account, many decision makers, many members of a buying committee, that is when ABM really can help you, because, ultimately these days, maybe 15 years ago, before the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, money was kind of much more freely given and freely, people would pay for solutions even on their corporate credit card. I remember large purchases being made. A lot of that has stopped now. Nowadays, in the last 14 years or whatever, there's a lot more due diligence taking place within the company. A lot more questions are being raised. There's a lot more integration now. When technology is being bought, nothing is ever standalone anymore. It's like, can this integrate with my CRM? Can it integrate with my finance package? Can it integrate with this? Can it integrate with that? So nowadays, nothing is really done on its own anymore. So more people naturally have to become involved. More people are being asked to have their say. And so therefore ABM really helps them, because you can help to engage with the CTO, the CIO, the CMO, the VP of sales, the COO, the CEO, the CFO, etc. So you've got many players who need to be engaged with, and each one has to be engaged in a different way. The language of sales is different to the language of finance, is different to the language of the C-suite, is different to the language of the CMO. So you've got to be able to build different messaging, different value propositions that can engage and talk to these audiences. So I think that is when ABM is the right fit. So conversely, where ABM is not really the right fit is when you're targeting smaller companies. You haven't really got the marketing resources to do this. Your average order value isn't sufficient to warrant the investment, both in time, your own resources, and the financial resources that you need in terms of the investment. And if you're just, if you've got a solution which is much more around, kind of a SaaS model of a subscription model, where you sign up and pay $100 a month or whatever, that really isn't, that's much better for a demand gen play than an ABM play.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there. As far as the order value, that makes sense. And I think where I can really see the benefit of ABM, because I work at a company where one of our solutions that we provide is an enterprise software. And our approach to it has just been really to break it down as to the smallest risk possible for the customer, and trying to make it so that the lower end of the decision makers can make a decision on something and get us in as quickly as possible. So trying to make it an investment of like $5,000 or less for the first step in the process, and kind of phasing it because of the challenge of selling something enterprise wide and trying to do this massive, whale deal is what we would call it, where, they're going to spend $100,000 a year, or 200, or 500,000 a year, or $1 million a year. It's really very long sales cycle then, and you have to get all of these buyers involved. And if you're working in a situation like that, and I work really closely with my sales guy on that product line, you can spend an incredible amount of time and energy working through the sales cycle. You've got your internal champion. You've had meetings with all of these people all the way along. Maybe you're 6 months in, 8 months in, 18 months in. You've really been working on this project for a long time. And then there's one guy who isn't really interested in learning about it. He's not interested in going through the details. He's already made up his mind that he doesn't need this because he's already buying something different from somewhere else or whatever. And they can just say, yeah, we're not going to do it. And you're 18 months in, you've had, 20 meetings, you've invested probably at that point thousands of dollars in prototypes or, different pieces of the puzzle. But if you were able to influence that top tier guy way earlier in the process through ABM, I could really see the advantage of that, because you're able to potentially loop some of those higher level executives in sooner into the conversation, or at least they're aware of who you are and your solution and what you do before they get to that point where they read the executive summary and go, I don't know if we want to invest in that right now. We'll put it off for next year or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, Joseph, I mean, typical, a lot of companies can be very good at landing deals, but not very good at expanding companies. And I think ABM is a really good, solid play for that, because you can, the sales team, they win the deal, but very often when you win a deal, it's never what you think it's going to be. It's because very often, because of the way that companies can be centralized or decentralized, the way that you might have to, jump from department to department for your solution to be rolled out properly, for the real power and benefit of your solution to be felt across the whole organization. That takes a lot more work, and I think that's not necessarily the work of sales. Of the initial sales team that win the deal. So ABM is a great play there when you want to actually get deep, penetrate the account, go down through all the departments, go from HR to marketing to operations to finance. That's when, going back to your point around landing and expanding, and it may well be that it could be that a company could have an initial deal that isn't or doesn't kind of enter into the warrant ABM category, but it may well be that the lifetime value does warrant it. So we one of the questions we ask our prospective clients when we're having the initial conversations is, okay, well, what's the first deal look like, but what does the lifetime look like? And sometimes we can uncover that a company that perhaps wouldn't necessarily be the right fit for ABM actually does turn out to be the right fit, because the prize is there to be had. It's just a case of how you actually engineer your strategy to actually have a team able to win that prize.
This week's episode of The Strategic Marketer is brought to you by the Brand Compass course. If you're looking to take your marketing services side hustle to the next level, the Brand Compass course is for you. In the course, you're going to learn how to identify your ideal customers and narrow down to serve a niche market. Then you're going to learn how to productize your offering so that it's easier for customers to understand exactly what you do for them. And then you're going to put all of this information into a one-page messaging guide. That way you can use your customer's language to speak exactly to their pain points and problems every single time. Check out the show notes for a link to the course. All right, so I'm going to ask you two opposite questions, and you can answer one and then the other. So, what is an example of what a bad ABM strategy would look like, and then what are some examples of what a good ABM strategy would look like?
Bad ABM. I mean, that sounds like some kind of film that you might watch later on Friday evening or something, but or the remake or whatever. So bad ABM. What does bad ABM look like? I mean, there's a few answers to that. I mean, obviously, we could talk about the classic answer, which is trying to bite off more than you can chew. So one way that people make a mistake with ABM at the beginning, when they're not very well versed in ABM, is trying to go after too many accounts. And I think that's a mistake that even, some seasoned marketing, B2B marketers can make. So trying to your eyes are bigger than your stomach, trying to go after too many accounts, trying to please too many people, trying to go into all the accounts that your sales team are looking to penetrate. That is one example of bad ABM. So conversely, good ABM would be much more focused, much more targeted, using data and insight and intent to help you and to inform your choice of accounts, to inform you about your prioritization, to inform you about your tiering, about why you should be going after these accounts and not these accounts. I think that's one example of bad ABM. Another example of bad ABM would be using technology. And there's lots of technology out there. There's lots of MarTech. There's lots of ABM tech out there. You believing that the technology is going to deliver you your objectives, that the technology is going to be the nirvana for you, that the technology is going to deliver that horizon, that destination you're trying to get to. And the answer is the technology won't do that. The technology brands that exist within MarTech, the technology brands that exist within ABM have done a phenomenal job in marketing their services. They've done an amazing job in selling what they say that the technology can do. And I think it's quite important to say I'm absolutely not anti-technology. I think there's amazing technology out there, and we, both with our clients and also, as a CMO of an agency, of an ABM agency, I use some really, really great technology. But it's actually about getting the strategy right first. So our agency mantra is strategy first, technology second. So bad ABM is when you lead with the technology. Good ABM is when you lead with the strategy. So I think that's one thing for people to always bear in mind. You don't need technology to do good ABM, but you do very bad ABM if you don't have a strategy which makes sense. So I think those are the two things for me: trying to bite off more than you can chew at the beginning, and secondly, leading with the technology rather than the strategy. Those are two classic examples of bad ABM.
Yeah. On the note of the technology, I think that's true just across the board. Technology, good technology will amplify whatever you're doing. It's not going to make a bad strategy good. And so figuring out your strategy, finding out on a small scale what's working, and then using technology to scale that. It's almost like if your emails are boring and nobody opens them, and then you're using a mass email tool to send boring emails, well, then you're just sending boring emails to more people. But if they're great emails and you're mass emailing people, then it's going to amplify that great message that people are interested in. But it's really the technology just amplifies whatever it is that you're doing. So if it's bad to begin with, it's not going to improve with the technology. So on the note of talking about what ABM looks like, how about some examples of good ABM strategy? And then maybe you could even just give an example of start to finish. It could either be an example of a customer that you've worked with, that you've seen success with, or if it's just hypothetically, this is what would work. But saying, the marketing team would work on these things. This is how you'd find the accounts. This is how they would work with the sales team, and then this is how the customer service department would be able to pick that up, and how you get all of those teams aligned. I know that's kind of a big question, but I don't know if you could kind of just walk us through from a high level what that would look like.
Well, I think there's a lot of foundational work, a lot of building blocks to an ABM strategy. And I think trying to get those building blocks aligned, doing your homework, which there is a significant amount of homework. It's not like, creating some assets, uploading them to LinkedIn, choosing some accounts, targeting those accounts with those assets, trying to get some downloads, get some ebook reads or whatever. That isn't ABM. That's just, some lead generation that may or may not help you, that may, probably will just end up clogging up your sales guys and getting your sales guys to be not the best supporters of your ABM strategy. I mean, good ABM is getting the building blocks right. So making sure that you're very clear as an organization, not as a marketing team, but as an organization, that everyone is aligned about who is your ideal customer. Who are they? What do they look like? Where do they live? What do they eat for breakfast, etc. So you've got to be very, very clear about who your ideal customer is, where they operate, what the issues they have they face, their challenges, etc. So that, if you're in the lift and you turn around and you've got one of your head of sales next to you, you say, hey, who is our ideal customer? Everyone is saying the same thing. So that is really, and the reality is that most people don't do that. Most people actually don't know who their ideal customer is. Sales think it's one thing. The CEO thinks it's another thing. The investors think it's another thing. Your venture capitalists think it's another. Your head of operations thinks it's another. Getting that alignment at the very beginning is absolutely crucial. We work a lot with our clients on that, working on the ideal customer profile, the ICP, working really hard so everyone says, God, we now know, we now accept, we now truly believe and are aligned that this type of customer, this type of account really is the right fit for us and for the solutions that we can offer to the market. Because once you've got your ICP right, then you can go and do your account selection work. And I run this Let's Talk ABM podcast, as you know, Joseph. And one of the questions I ask on that is, where do you spend most of your time as an ABMer, as a B2B marketer? And the vast majority of people that I've had as guests on Let's Talk ABM say account selection, that they spend most of their time working out which accounts to target. Because, I've had experience in previous companies of, CEOs saying to me, hey, we want to win these accounts, and this is a list. And it's a list picked from the air. It's a list picked of nice logos. It's a list picked.
The wish list.
It's not. Yeah, it's a nice fancy logo list, and there's no science behind it. But equally, we've talked to customers and talked to prospects, and they say, "Yeah, we've got a list of accounts." And we say, "Well, how did you come about the list?" Well, they say, "Well, this came from sales." And then you go to sales and say, "Hey guys, how did you come up with this list?" They say, "Well, it's a nice list that we've had in our Excel spreadsheet for a long time, and we kind of update it every now and again. But there's no real science behind it." So, using science, using data, and that's another thing that separates ABMers from many other B2B marketers, is I always think that ABMers need to be data scientists. They need to really get their hands dirty. They really need to understand the data. They really need to understand what it is that makes this account list the right accounts. And then also, when you do work on the account list and you link it back to your ICP and you kind of do the prioritization and the tiering, and then you say, right, these are our priority 1 accounts, these are our priority 2 accounts, these are our priority 3 accounts. You can then actually say, right, to priority 1 accounts, this is the type of ABM experience we want to take them through. Our priority 2 accounts, this is the type of ABM experience we want to take them through. And our priority 3 accounts, we're going to run these tactics to them. So you can actually then start aligning each type of account into a group, into a prioritization group, and then they will get a different level of support, a different level of marketing, a different level of account experience, a different level of personalization for each one. And then that then gets everyone on the same page. And then, the key thing that we say to our customers and to potential customers is that it's not a photograph that stays the same. And so we dynamically are always analyzing these accounts and deciding whether to promote them into a different program or whether to demote them into a different program. So based on their behavior, based on their level of engagement, based on how they're reacting to the ABM programs that they are being experiencing, the ABM programs that these accounts are experiencing, we can then decide whether they warrant being moved from a one-to-many to a one-to-few to a one-to-one, or conversely from a one-to-one to a one-to-few to a one-to-many. So we actually dynamically move accounts around based on...
Okay, so let me stop you there for a second. So step 1 is we need to identify our ideal customer. And that comes up all the time in this podcast because that is absolutely vital. And I think all marketers at any level that are worth their salt understand that. And, the most of the people I've had on the podcast, whether it's in marketing or I've had a few salespeople on, it's a very recurring conversation that comes up, but it is amazing how few people actually take the time to do that. And everybody thinks they do. Then you ask a few questions, you sit down with the top leaders at a company individually and ask them, who's your ideal customer? And you're going to get a completely different response from all of them. And that is a huge problem. So step 1 is you got to identify that ideal customer. Step 2 is then doing the research to make sure that the companies you're looking for are fit that ICP, and then that they're, going to be a good fit, that maybe they're within a buying window if they just purchased somebody else's software this year. probably not going to be buying your software this year, and it might be, one of those tier 3 lists that you start reaching to or whatever. So you do the research. So then what's the next phase? You've done your research, you've narrowed down who your ICP is. What comes next after that?
So as I mentioned, you've done your ICP work. You're very clear who your ideal customer is. And obviously, I mentioned you've done your account. You use that framework for your account selection, and your account selection. Then you bring in different data. So you bring in your first-party data, which is the data that you own, that's in your CRM. You bring in second-party data. For example, we use a tool called Lead Feeder that allows us to see which kind of accounts are showing interest in our services and are visiting our website as anonymous visitors. And Lead Feeder allows us to de-anonymize those visitors. So you use a second-party data tool like Lead Feeder, and then you use a third-party data. So, for example, we use Science, which is an intent data platform, but there's other platforms out there such as Sixth Sense, Terminus, etc. So then you bring your first, second, third-party data together. All that data together allows you to kind of hone down and hone in on the accounts that you then, as I mentioned before, you then prioritize and you tier into your 1, 2s, and 3s. Then you've got a solid account. You then kind of cross-reference that and you benchmark that, and you sense check that data with your sales teams, because it's always important to never do this work in isolation, because if you do it in isolation, then all you're going to be doing is forcing down onto other people your thinking and your ideas, whereas actually ABM is a collaborative approach. So you then interview your sales guys, you make sure that you're bringing that data in, because they'll have insights into the accounts that you won't have. They'll have qualitative insight that your quantitative work isn't showing you. So you bring in the sales data as well, and then between those two major teams, the marketing and sales, you're able to actually come up with an account list that actually holds water. You're able to bring an account list to the table that actually is based on science, based on data, but also based on qualitative work as well. And it also then it builds everyone a kind of a framework, as I mentioned, to kind of really kind of work together on those accounts. Once you've got those accounts and you know who your ideal customer is, you can then actually say, right, what do we know about these accounts? And that's when the interesting work comes together, because where typically people might jump through the hoops and jump through the processes but not actually necessarily do the work, is actually doing the insights work that is required to actually understand these accounts and to actually be able to know enough about the accounts, know enough about the landscape that these accounts are operating in, know enough about the competitive landscape these accounts are operating in, know enough about the macro challenges that these accounts are facing, and then at an account level, know what they're trying to achieve, know the executives that are actually involved in the decision making inside those accounts, because all that insights work will actually feed into your messaging strategy, feed into your value proposition work, feed into the account experience that you build, etc. So all the work that comes afterwards needs to be prefaced with the insights work that you do, because that will then inform everything else that you do afterwards. So, I mean, one guest that we were talking to recently, it's a fintech company, very, multi-billion-dollar fintech company called Finastra, and it's really fascinating that they target large financial institutions all over the world, and she was talking through they kind of commission insights work. It comes back with 100 pages or whatever, and then it just, with one example, with one financial institution, the insights allowed them to work out which department in that financial institution was the most open to their solution. So rather than thinking, well, this financial solution has got offices in 100 countries, rather, et cetera, the insights work allowed them to think about one department and to think about the value proposition that they should be offering into that department. And then that opened the door to win that department. And then, as I mentioned before, land and expand, allow them to land in that department and expand then within the entire financial institution. So it's really kind of lifting up the lid, to actually see within the company, and then allowing you to target with ABM the right department with the right message.
Strategic Marketer is brought to you in part by Thrive Themes. Thrive Themes is a killer visual WordPress editor. They've also recently launched editable themes so that you can edit every element of your WordPress theme. You can create amazing landing pages that are beautiful and conversion focused. They've built all of their products around helping you convert more leads into customers. You can find out more about Thrive Themes by clicking the link in the show notes. Yeah, so it's interesting because it's almost like if you took I'm just going to use a marketing funnel just because it's something people are familiar with, but you're almost taking that in a sense and like flipping it over. So instead of taking all of your marketing effort and trying to reach top of the funnel people, and then trying to get them to go down until you get that hopefully pinpointed person to be on with sales, but then it turns out most of the time those people aren't that qualified and you're wasting sales time. So then you put a lot of effort and resources up front, hoping that in the end of the day, you're going to have some laser focused account on the other end. But instead, you're kind of laser focusing on the person doing the research up front, which is going to obviously be a lot of work, but that's going to be a lot of work on a smaller team and a smaller amount of resources that go into that resource, that research. You don't have 25 marketing people on your team probably working on figuring that research out. I mean, obviously, if you have a huge team, you might. But the point is, you're using a smaller team, smaller resources to do the research up front. And now, when you're laser focused on these 5 accounts, now you can put the weight of all of those marketing and sales resources that were kind of being shotgunned out there into the accounts that are actually going to move. And based on research, there's a very high likelihood that these few accounts are going to move. Now we're going to put the weight of all of our resources into these 5 accounts versus, half of our stuff just being out there and hoping that it sticks with somebody.
Yeah, and I think the key thing, Joseph, obviously, if you haven't done the research, if you haven't got the insights on the account, on the environment it's in, etc., your message is going to fall flat. And I think if you look on LinkedIn, if you look at all these kind of adverts that people are paying for you to see that advert, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always blown away by the adverts I see, and there's just how the lack of understanding of who I am, even though they're paying for me to see it.
Absolutely.
Or LinkedIn messages that they're paying for me to receive, or LinkedIn conversational ads that they're paying for me to receive, that are all falling on deaf ears because they're of no value to me and they don't understand me. Now, if you take that,
yeah.
And I'm working for an ABM agency. We're whatever 30 odd people. But if you amplify that into a large organization where you're trying to sell your software solution, or sell your cyber solution, or sell your HR tech solution, or your workforce management solution, or whichever kind of technology you're trying to sell into that company, if you can't actually understand that customer and show that potential customer that you know them, you're just going to be one more technology company bothering them with a whole bunch of messages. Absolutely. That isn't going to work. Whereas if you can show them, hey, we know what you're facing, and here's a solution that we believe, based on what we know about you, can actually help you. And here's a bunch of other people who've actually had a similar experience to you. And then, if we go further down the development of an ABM strategy, then we kind of build these account experiences where we're taking people through kind of the awareness, the educate, the influence, and commit stage. And that's really when you actually start seeing things come to life, because we build, quite sophisticated, intelligent, impactful experiences that take, one example we've done for one client is we built a video game, and it's basically, the idea is for developers, because that's the target audience, and the developers have to play a video game, and by playing the video game, it kind of unveils a whole range of solutions, and it helps them to learn more about our customer through this game. And there's lots of different ways that we're doing, but ultimately we're trying to create a unique experience. We're trying to engage a potential customer. We're trying to make them understand that there is something that can help them with that challenge, because you in your job, Joseph, or me in my job, or any other person in their job, we face challenges every day, and we know what they are, but not necessarily everyone else who's trying to talk to us actually knows what they are. And when somebody comes to us and says, hey, this is your problem, this is what you're facing, this is what the future looks like if you can't solve that problem, here's a future that we can show you where that problem is solved. do you want to know more? If somebody said that to me, I'd be like, okay, well, where can I have a meeting? When can I talk to you?
Right.
But the reality is that most people don't do that. And most people are just
Absolutely.
in the push mode. And that is where most people's marketing is falling flat.
Yeah. And I mean, we could probably talk about this all day, and we're probably getting to the end, because I'd love to keep hearing about, some of the really, really specifics of what kind of messaging you guys would do. And, it sounds like once you're done with that research phase, then you can really ultra personalize it. And if I'm going to pull it back to just something that I understand from working with sales team, my sales team is, if you're sending out cold emails, if you just send out a generic cold email, you might get 1 in a 500 answered. I don't know, pretty low odds. And half the time that's going to be them responding back to you and saying, please remove me from your list. Even if your marketing's done a really good job and you've done really good research, maybe you'll get a better response rate than that. But if you take 5 minutes as a salesperson and you look at the person's profile on LinkedIn that you're trying to reach to and personalize it to them specifically and just say a couple things, your chances of getting that email opened up go up drastically. So you're almost doing something similar, only on a much larger, much more sophisticated scale, where you're not just trying to reach one person and personalize it to them, but you're taking an entire organization and you're doing all of that research up front, so that your messaging, every piece of messaging you create, is going to be geared and personalized towards that company specifically, their goals, the things that they're trying to achieve, what their shareholders are looking to get, what what the board has been saying that they're looking for, the promises they've made to the market, all of these different things. You're actually able to speak directly to that and personalize it. And if you've taken the time to do that and you understand their pain points and problems to that degree, much better chance that you're going to get a meeting. And in a sense, you're just taking all of the effort of your messaging and putting it to that small personalized group of people, and your chances just go way up. You're not wasting nearly as many of your marketing resources on activities that you don't really know whether they're going to move the needle in the long run or not.
Yeah, I mean, I like to call ABM zero waste marketing. And obviously other people have, fishing with a net versus fishing with a spear. Fishing with a net is much more kind of like, demand gen and lead gen. And obviously fishing with a spear is much more ABM focused, because you see the fish, you go after that fish, as opposed to trying to throw the net, and you might get a bunch of rusty old cans and God knows a few small little fish or whatever, and you might get lucky, but
right.
Generally speaking, my experience of fishing is you're not very lucky very often, and you end up getting seasick, and that's the end of it. But I think the issue going back to your point around personalization is you've got to be sure that the price is worth it. So there are tactics and there's strategies within ABM where you can address a wider audience with less personalization. You can start the conversations. You can start that kind of brand, going back to your point around brand. You can start building your brand. You can start changing perceptions. You can start raising awareness around, hey, this is who we are. This is what makes us different. This is a solution we have available for the fintech industry or whatever. You can start doing that. But then as the price becomes more worth it, and you start doing more personalization with a one-to-few ABM program or a one-to-one ABM program, that is when you're upping the personalization, and that is when you're upping the kind of the game, so to speak. So we have different programs for different types of clients, for different types of
well, the bigger the potential sale, the more effort it's worth putting into those accounts. If it's
if you
$1
think
million
about
a year software, or $2 million or $5 million a year software, it's worth putting a lot of effort into that personalized, and going that route, so that you're really the option that they're looking at, versus, if it's a $30,000 sale, you can still do that. But I mean, the amount of resources it's worth investing into that. So that kind of determines the time you spend on your research, and the level of research is going to be different for a $30,000 account than a $5 million account. And the amount of, personalization and messaging that you can do in your messaging would change too. So I just want to wrap it up here, because we could keep going all day on it. What are just some 2 or 3 practical steps that somebody could take to start working towards an ABM strategy in their organization? What would be the first 2 or 3 things you'd encourage them to do if they're thinking about going that route?
Well, if they haven't started ABM or done any ABM before, and they've been much more in the kind of branding, event or demand gen world, the first thing I would do is say, go and sit down physically or virtually, depending where you are in your business, in your offices. Go and sit down with your VP of sales. Go and sit down with your VP of sales and say to your VP of sales, tell me which accounts are you trying to win this quarter? And they'll know, because the VP of sales knows exactly which accounts they're trying to win. Go and sit down, get those accounts, start small, get them to give you 5 accounts that they'd like to win this quarter or next quarter, depending on where you are. Go back to your desk, go back to your team and say, look, guys, we're going to do a mini project where we're going to do the impossible to help our sales guys to win these accounts. Come up with the strategies, come up with the ideas, come up with the kind of omni-channel approach. You don't need technology. You just need good strategy. Think about what you can do to influence, what you can do to educate, what you can do to raise awareness within those accounts of the solution or solutions that your sales team are currently trying to talk to that account about. That is the start. That is the genesis of an ABM strategy and the very start of building an ABM team. What will happen is your sales team will win some of those accounts. Your sales team will come back to you and they will thank you for what you did, because they will recognize that what you did helped them to move the dial, what you did help them to get those conversations, what you did help them to change the perception of the prospect about your brand, what you did help them to close that deal. Take that learning, share that learning within the company, get the CEO, get the C-suite, get other people, get other departments to say, look, guys, this is what we just did. Me and Jerry over in sales, we just did this. We spent this much money. This is the results we had. I'd now like to take this into a much more, solid approach for a larger group of accounts. Then you can start talking about using an agency such as ours. Then you can start talking about hiring more people. Then you can start talking about, well, what technology would I need to support that strategy, et cetera, going forward. That's probably where I would always recommend people to start. And obviously, I think the last point I would make is go and talk to other people who've done it. Go and talk to other people who've done ABM. Go and learn from what other people have done. I mean, I've mentioned my podcast a few times, Let's Talk ABM. I've done about 34, 35 interviews with some of the best ABM people out there in the world at the moment. Go and listen to some episodes of that. That's great learning out there. Go and learn from other people and take notes and swap ideas. And you'll be very surprised how you can get something off the ground quite quickly.
Yeah, I love that approach because, working and selling software, we really are trying to move more towards that approach with our customers too. Just saying, look, we don't want you to buy $1 million worth of software from us this year. We want you to buy something that we can actually help you deploy in a short amount of time that you're going to see wins from, so that you end up staying as $1 million customer a year as time goes on, or whatever it would be, $100,000, $200,000. But if we try to go for the max of that account up front, the sales cycle is way longer. It's much more challenging. And then even if you get buy-in from them to do that, chances that you're going to actually get it deployed, that you're going to get internal buy-in. Like once you've made that initial sale on a really big project like that, that's really just the beginning, because then you have to get buy-in from the rest of the company. Whereas if you start small, like you're discussing, and get those quick wins and build it up, then you're getting that buy-in as you go along. So by the time you get to that, the max of that account, you're going to stay there. They're going to stay your customer for a much, much longer period of time. And it's going to be a lot harder to unseat you as a vendor than if you try to go in big at the beginning. And you're going to also have a much better chance of actually getting people to sign on the dotted line, because it's less risk and everything like that. So, I really love that approach. So I'll definitely link in the show notes to Let's Talk ABM and to your LinkedIn profile. But is there anywhere else that people can look for you or what you guys do on the ABM side?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so that people can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Declan Mulkeen, and there's links out to our agency, Strategic ABM, there as well. And we as I said, we also have a podcast and we create a lot of content for ABM, and we're just trying to do as much as we can to help people learn more about ABM, to navigate through their kind of ABM journeys, and to help everyone become a better ABMer. So just look out for our content, really.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Declan. You really gave us some great information and clarified some things around ABM for me, because I've definitely heard the term, but you've laid it out. I love that. I love what you said about the zero waste marketing, and that makes a lot of sense. You're basically, instead of throwing spaghetti against the wall and making sure it sticks, you make sure what's going to stick first, and then you only throw the pieces of spaghetti you already know are going to stick, I guess, is to use that analogy. But yeah, thanks so much for
that's
coming on.
another good
Really appreciate having
analogy.
you.
Yeah, I used to run an Italian restaurant in New Jersey, so that's a very good analogy around spaghetti. So if it sticks to the wall, then it's ready to be eaten. So yeah, definitely use that approach as well.
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to The Strategic Marketer wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could do me a personal favor and hit 5 stars on the rating, you don't have to leave a full review, just hit 5 stars. It would really help me out. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Strategic Marketer.